Trigger warning for Toph fans. I repeat, trigger warning for Toph fans. Hello, welcome back to the Geek Talk. Today I wanted to discuss the idea of if old Toph could defeat Kuvira during Operation Beifong. Of course, we know this episode pretty well. It was time when Toph said that, Kuvira was giving a bad name to all metalbenders, and then she saves everybody, and then they leave back to the swamp. And then to me, I had questions about this, because I'm like, why didn't Toph just straight up defeat her if she's, as great as she is? And as we know, in the previous series, she is contending for best earthbender period as a child against Boomy. So we know for sure that after Boomy's death, that Toph would have exceeded her prime, and she would have been the best not only earthbender but metalbender while she was chief of police. But that same narrative doesn't seem to be the case for when she is now her older elder self. And that's what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to thank the members on my channel, the people who actually said they wanted this video. If you too want to become a member and vote on my Monday videos, you can go ahead and hit the join button below or in the description box below. There's two questions I want to kind of kick this discussion off. One is the idea of why didn't Kuvira challenge Toph, and why didn't Toph challenge Kuvira in that situation? First, let's talk about Toph. So for me, the reason that Toph did not challenge Kuvira isn't because of what she says later in the episode of that you have to leave it to the kids, or rather, I think saying that one quote out of context doesn't give the full picture, because the full picture of that context is this. First, Opal says, "Aren't you coming back to Republic City with us, Grandma?" And then Toph replies that, "No, my fighting days are over. Don't tell Korra, but my back is killing me now. This is why you don't see Katara messing with that Civil War nonsense. At some point, you gotta leave it to the kids." And with the full context of that actual quote, it's not that she's saying leave it to the kids because she's saying that, hey, we're not going to be around all the time. These kids should figure out their own problems. She's saying that leave it to the kids because we're too old. Katara, we saw her. She's barely moving. She's like walking through the snow really slowly. Toph, we see her complaining about her back problems. The reason these individuals aren't taking direct action in the storylines is because they're just old. That just happens. You get old. You can't, continue fighting. You can't continue being part of these physically enduring circumstances. But then yes, I think some people will rightly say then, well, what about Boomy? Boomy is actually older than Toph is in the show at this point in time. And that's true. But the difference between Boomy and Toph is that Boomy was keeping up his physical abilities while Toph went off and went to a swamp. And same with Katara. She retired. There was no reason for either of them to fight while Boomy was living during the 100-year war, so he was keeping up his physical abilities. Also, I think that Boomy might have had, some sort of play into the immortal earthbender things. You can watch my video about earthbenders and immortality there. And it's something that I think that Toph never learned, and that's something that Boomy did, and maybe it was lost on Toph, or maybe Toph didn't care about immortality. Who knows? But again, you can watch that video to see more of that insight. But even before she has that conversation with Opal and the rest of her family, she says this before even going to engage with Kuvira to save everybody else. "I didn't come here to fight with Kuvira or destroy a cannon. I'm here to save my family. It will take everything we have just to get out alive." And some people will say that, well, Toph should have just, easily just disabled her, like Kuvira, and the reason why she didn't is because of plot reasons, because, they didn't want Toph to save the day. But, I mean, to me, it's established pretty well. One, Toph understands that Kuvira isn't something to mess with. Kuvira and her army are not something to mess with. Even she says that, hey, we're going to need everything just to have a chance to do this. So the idea of Toph being able to single-handedly take on Kuvira's army and take on Kuvira herself, I think is a little bit of a stretch. I think it's something that is capable of prime Toph, but we're not talking about prime Toph. We're talking about the old Toph, who has shown us that she has physical ailments and that she is not able to keep up with a younger fighter like Kuvira, despite, Toph's skill. And don't worry, I hear some of you guys already, before you mention it, the reason that Toph did so well against Korra, and there's context that most people leave out, is that Korra was suffering from PTSD and was still laced with metal poison. Okay, so with us knowing that, Toph is not in her prime anymore, she has these physical ailments, why didn't Kuvira challenge Toph? Well, why did she just let her fly off on the Sky Bison? Now, the reason for this, I would say, is namely reputation. And reputation is huge. I mean, like I was saying before, everyone in the world knows how great Toph is. Even Bolin is fanboying on Toph all the time. Everyone knows about how great she is and that she is not only the greatest earthbender, especially after the time of Boomy, but also the best metalbender period, the pioneer of metal bending. So fear and reputation go a long way. And I'm sorry guys, it's really hot today. today. It is 105 degrees in Los Angeles right now, and I'm sweating bullets. So if you see me like sweating, that is the reason. But yeah, I just talked about that in my Azula video, talking about her greatest power being fear and, you know, intimidation, and reputation plays a large part. And I think it could have led to Toph potentially defeating Kuvira in that moment, until Kuvira realizes that, hey, she's a lot older and she's not moving as quickly as she used to do. And I think that will lead to something that Toph fans wouldn't want to see, and I think that's mainly the reason why we didn't see that fight. Not because Toph really was like, let's leave it to the kids. It's really because she was old and she probably would have, I'm sorry to say it, she probably would have lost to Kuvira. And this idea of reputation, I think it's something that I discuss a lot in Harry Potter itself. If you don't know Harry Potter, I'm sorry for these references, but it's the best way I can make this sense to what's happening here. So there's a character called Mad-Eye Moody, and Mad-Eye Moody is known to be one of the greatest Aurors ever. And Aurors in that world are basically like wizard police. Like, he was the best wizard policeman, you know, in history. And people feared him. Death Eaters feared him. No one wanted to go against him. And this is shown mostly in the last book, where Voldemort goes after Mad-Eye Moody first, even though there's a bunch of, you know, decoy Harrys, you know, all around. And, you know, you have Harry with Hagrid, Harry with Lupin, Harry with Kingsley, like you have all these Harrys. And Voldemort, in knowing the reputation of Mad-Eye, knowing the reputation of Prime Mad-Eye, goes for him first, even though I would argue that at that time, Mad-Eye Moody was not the greatest wizard in terms of like dueling and combat in that kind of sense. Of the group that was taking Harry to safety, I would say that Kingsley Shacklebot was the greatest wizard of that time, and Voldemort should have, you know, probably gone for him first. And the reason for that is because, as we've seen from the books, really small things, like little passages in the books, we see that Mad-Eye he's out of practice. He's been retired for years. He's not been facing Death Eaters for nearly a decade, a little bit more than that actually now, because if we're thinking about Harry's lifespan. And we see people defeat him. We see him get defeated in Order of the Phoenix. I'm talking about the books, of course. The movies are kind of a different canon. We see him being defeated, of course, by Barty Croucher Jr. and by Wormtail. So he's actually not this great wizard that he used to be. And this same thing actually shifts to Kuvira and Toph. So Kuvira, when she's seeing this great display of bending, she's like, oh crap, there's no way I'm gonna be able to defeat that. But she doesn't realize that that was probably Toph's best effort. It was Toph kind of puffing her chest and being like, yeah, hey, back up, you know I'm the greatest earthbender ever. But really, if a fight actually was engaged and it continued, I don't think she would have been able to sustain herself. So in the context of like a versus series, I would say that, you know, Toph would win possibly the early round, but then when it gets to the mid fight and the late fight, she would be less likely to have those consistent majority victories, and those will start going to Kuvira. So let's say in the scenario that they do face each other, let's say that, you know, Toph still says, you know, you give metalbenders a bad name, but instead of Kuvira just watching her fly off, she actually engages Toph. Most fans would not want to see this, but I think Kuvira would have won that exchange. Of course, at the beginning of the fight, I think it would have seemed like an even fight, and, you know, Kuvira would be on the losing end because, you know, you still have Toph's skill, you still have her skill. But as it progresses further and further, we would see those back problems come into play. We would see how Toph's physical ailments would weigh her down. And in that, we would see Kuvira start taking the lead and defeating old Toph. So if I was giving this like a number, like I do in my versus videos, I would say that Kuvira would take 7 out of 10 matches, and those 3 out of 10 matches that I think Toph would win would be a surprise attack or some sort of overwhelming power in those early fight scenarios. The issue is that I don't think she would have had it in her. I think that first thing that she did was pretty much, you know, most of her tank. She would have been depleted at that point, and the majority, more consistent, more logical victories would go with Kuvira. Now, of course, if we're talking about Toph in her prime, if we're talking about her as chief of police, though it's speculative, we don't really have any concrete combative abilities from Toph as of yet, unless they make some comics or some novels about, you know, Team Avatar when they were adults in Republic City. I would say she definitely beats Kuvira, and I think people don't realize that about me when I put Kuvira over Toph in these situations. I'm not saying that Prime Toph wouldn't beat Kuvira. That's ridiculous. I think Prime Toph, once you bring back those reflexes, once you bring back that physicality, Kuvira has nothing on her. The Toph is just too skilled. But we're talking about old Toph in this specific situation, and if we're talking about old Toph in Operation Beifong, I don't think she takes the majority victory. And I get it. I really get that it's hard to even consider something like this when you say that someone can defeat Toph, because Toph has been lauded and put on a pedestal as being, you know, this greatest fighter and also just a great character in general. It was hard to watch Mike Tyson fight past his prime and get knocked out. It's hard to see Michael Jordan come back on the Washington Wizards and not do the same numbers that he was doing in the 80s and 90s. And it's hard to see Willie Mays, you know, go past his prime and not do as well as he was doing in his younger career. It's just a fact of life. Father Time will always win out. And considering that Toph was not upkeeping her physical attributes as the same way that Boomy did, because she really didn't have to, she could just retire, it's Kuvira is likely going to be the victor in that scenario if she actually pursued Toph in that situation. But the reason why she did not pursue Toph in that situation is because of reputation. Like, it's not taking anything away from Toph. When we're saying these sorts of things, when I'm saying these sorts of things, I'm not trying to like downplay Toph's ability. What I'm trying to be is realistic in the situation that we are presented with and what the story itself tells us. We have Toph admitting that they would need everything they had to be able to take on Kuvira. That includes having Toph involved. We have her admitting that she has physical ailments and to not tell Korra, because, and also people tend to forget that Korra at that time had PTSD and was laced with metal poison, so she was not fighting Toph at her best. Yeah, just leave out context for Korra, but not leave out context for Toph. That's just kind of the situation that seems to be played. But I just wanted to make sure that I'm giving full context to all these things, and that when we are presenting our arguments, whether you agree or not, make sure that all those things are being brought up. Don't just say one thing or disregard something else and then say that you're right, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. Like, I think all context should matter. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think that old Toph would have been capable of defeating Kuvira a majority of the times? Would she take a majority victory? Or do you agree with me that Kuvira is more likely the victor in that specific scenario against an old Toph during Operation Beifong? That's it. I'll see you guys on the next one. This one's gonna be pretty crazy in the comments. I already know. It's okay. This is just the nature of these things. But I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.